going to go over the cubic interpolation function in Affinity Photo's procedural texture filter. When I saw this function, I found it pretty confusing because the other interpolation functions seem to be pretty easy to use. They have two different values, A and B, and then an interpolant, which interpolates between those two patterns. And so those can be patterns or vectors, and then the interpolant has to match. So if it's a, let's say a 3-element vector, then the interpolant has to be a 3-element vector. But other than that, they seem to work pretty much as expected. But the cubic interpolate function has 5 inputs, A, B, C, D, and T. Now the last one, T, is the interpolant, but I had no idea what the other 4 were or how they were used. Well, I've experimented with it a little bit, and I think I have it mostly figured out. I'm going to explain how the cubic interpolation function works in this video. To get started, I'm going to take a look at how interpolation is implemented on the noise functions so that you'll have a basic understanding of interpolation. I'll start with a new document. Choose XGA. I'll set it to 1024 by 1024 pixels and make sure it's in RGB8 mode and create that, and then I'm going to fill it with black. I'll choose the move tool, and then I'll add a live procedural texture filter. I'm going to add a single equation and just leave it on the red channel, and then I'll add a real number custom input, A, set that equal to 4, I'll call that scale. I'll add 2 0 to 1 sliders. The first one I'm going to label smooth, and the second one I'm going to label stretch. Up here I'm going to start with a coordinate system, var, v equals vec2 of just x and y. Now I want this to be centered in the middle of my image, so I'm going to subtract the width of the document over 2 from x, and I'm going to subtract the height of the document over 2 from y. So that should center it in the middle of the image. And then I'm going to multiply by A, and I could divide by either H or W. I'll just divide by W. I'm going to create another variable. I'll call it N, and I'm going to set that equal to noise of hi of v dot x. The noise function, if I add an h to it, it will make it have a range between -1 and 1. And then if I add an I to it, it'll be sort of pixelated. So every step will be a different value of noise. Now if I turn on the green and blue channels, it'll have a gray scale. If I bring this up from 4, you can see it'll have different values of gray. So random values of gray. I'm going to set this back down to 10. Now I want to have this offset, so I don't want to just have these numbers. I want to make something sort of like this intensity waveform up here, like my scope. So I'm going to make a customized scope function. So to do that, I'm going to add on v.y. You can see here it's already almost like a scope. Now I'm going to take a smoothstep function and just isolate this to the center values of each of these. So to do that, I'm going to use a smooth step of 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, and n. The middle two show where it's going to go to 1, and then this shows where it's going to go to 0. All right, now they're all the same value, but if I subtract my smoothing value, b, from the first 0.5, and I add my smoothing value, b, to the second 0.5, then it'll look something like that, and I can bring this down until I have a nice series of lines there. I'm going to turn off the green and the blue channels. So those are my random values. and I'm going to be interpolating between those values. So I'm going to copy this, I'm going to add a new equation, and I'm going to paste it down here. And instead of noisehi, I'm going to change this to just noiseh. So noiseh uses linear interpolation. You can see it starts at this corner of the noisehi function and moves to that corner of the next one sequentially. So it's like a straight line connecting these random numbers. So that's the linear interpolation method. I'm going to add one more. So I'm going to look at cubic interpolation. And I'll put that on the blue channel. And instead of just noiseh, I'm going to change this to cubic. Let's see what that does. So the cubic has a smoother interpolation. In fact, it's continuous not just at the points, it hits every one of these random numbers, but it also has a continuous curve. So this one, the curvature is not continuous, it has a sort of jagged edge to it, whereas the cubic has a continuous curve to it. So it has a little bit smoother curve. Now I could do that. I'm going to stretch this out a little bit. To use the stretch function, I forgot to do that. I have to divide these by c. So I'm going to divide the noise value by c. And I'll do that in each one of these. Okay, and now I should be able to stretch this out by bringing this down, and that stretches those out a little bit so I can see them better. Now I'm going to change the linear to a sinusoidal just to see what that looks like. So there's a sinusoidal. You can see that's close to the cubic, but when, in this case, the cubic sort of overshoots a little bit, whereas the sine function sort of holds on to it a little bit better. For instance, if I was interpolating between these two levels, they're very close together. Why does this one go way up in the air like that? Okay, so the cubic has this sort of defect that if two values are very close, it can overshoot like this. It wants to put a rounded curve between those two, and it adds this extra squiggle that isn't really a good approximation of these two. So in a lot of cases, the sine or the SC, I could look at that one too. So let me change it to SC, and it'll probably be just slightly different. Sine or SC are often better ways to sort of approximate these random numbers. But cubic has some advantages. It looks very nice in Perlin noise. The next part will be how does the cubic interpolation method work. So I'll look at that next. So I'm going to start with a new document. I'll set it to 1024 by 1024 pixels. Make sure it's in RGB8 mode and create that. I'll fill it with black. Choose Move tool. Add a live procedural texture filter. I'm going to add a single equation, assign it to the 3 color channels. Now for the cubic interpolation function, it is cubic interp, or you could use CERP as a shorthand for that. I'll start with cubic interp. So if you look at the documentation for cubic interpolation, it has 5 inputs. There's A, B, C, D, and then a 5th one, T. Now T is obviously the interpolant, but they don't explain what the other 4 inputs are for. So for this example, in order to show this, I'm going to have the interpolant just be the X value as it goes across the screen. So if I set that to X over W, it will vary as you move across the screen. And then for the other values, I'm going to use 0 to 1 sliders, A, B, C, and D. Okay, so it's doing something. And then if I set B to 0, I can see that it's changing from 0 to 1 as it goes across the screen. So I'm going to set C and D to 0 and see what that does. Okay, so now I'm going to reverse C and B, put C to 0 and B up to 1. So it goes from 1 down to 0. Okay, so if I reverse these, it goes to 0 up to 1. So I know that B and C are the two things that it's interpolating between. Now what do these A and D do then? So if I look at A, I could change this over to here. If I look at the scope, I can see that now it has the starting slope of this is close to 0. And then it goes up and it rounds off and flattens off at the top. If I set this one, if I reverse these two, then the starting slope of these is, you know, maybe approximately 1, but it's definitely not 0. So it sort of is a lazier curve. So you can shape the interpolation with these C and D factors to help to shape that. So you could have this one like that, this one over like that. You can shape them in a different way. If I put them down here, now the slope is 0 when I have them like that. So let's go back to the other way. Yeah, so here where I had sort of a pointy end on this, when I had this one 0 and that one 1, if I reverse these two, now I have a flat side on it. So these are related to each other somehow. So this one, if these are opposite, we get flat edges. Let's see if that makes sense. So if I change this around and make them opposite, yeah, I have sort of a flat edge. If these are the same, so if these two match, they'll have sort of a closer to a linear interpolation. If these are opposite from each other, it'll be more like a smooth interpolation. Okay? Now, you don't have to leave these at just 0 to 1. You could push them farther than that. And so, and as I showed in the other example, where this can sort of overshoot in places, you can get this to go and overshoot to negative numbers and get very large numbers out of this. So these shaping controls, A and D, are used to shape the interpolation, the cubic interpolation. In traditional cubic interpolation, you try to have the slope continuous at the two endpoints, and then, of course, they have to equal the values at the two endpoints. Okay, so you have both the values and the slope have to be equal, and then you fit a cubic polynomial to those values. All right, so I'm going to try a more complicated example, and so I'm going to create a coordinate system. V equals vec2 of Rx and Ry, and times A1 divided by W. So I have to add in a real value for my A1, and I'll make that 4, I guess. And then I'm just going to delete the B and the C, and I'm going to create another variable, B equals, I'll just use the oscillator I function of V. And then I'll have another variable, C equals, and I'll use the oscillator sc function of V for that one. So my B is oscillator I, which is the checkerboard, and then my C is oscillator sc, which is sort of the smooth checkerboard. And let's look at that. So now it sort of transitions from a checkerboard to a smooth checkerboard as I go across the image. And if I bring up my scaling factor, you can see that change. Now, I can adjust these. You can see a subtle change in these as I change them. It isn't real extreme. There's like a subtle difference in the transition between these two patterns. So that's what you get out of that. Now I'm going to take the A and D out, and I'm going to add two real values for A and D. Okay, and they're currently set to 0, but I'll set this one to 1. Now, if I change these and I make this D a large negative value, it's all going higher, it's sort of overshooting, it's above 1. If I make this one a large positive value, then it can go negative down below 1. Okay, so you can get these to sort of do some wacky things if you go out of the range between 0 and 1. All right, so that's the cubic interpolation function. It can also be written CERP, and it takes 5 inputs. A and D are shaping inputs, B and C are your pattern, and then the last one, T, is the interpolant. So it seems like it's sort of overly complicated to really make a lot of use of this one. The benefits seem sort of marginal for how complicated it is, having to put in 4 different inputs. So that's the cubic interpolation function. Let me know if you have any comments or questions, and thanks for watching.